Imagine a world where wealth and power could overshadow even the most basic human decency. A place where gifts weren't measured in love or thoughtfulness, but in control and ownership. Now picture a baron preparing a present for his wife, something meant to astonish, to impress, to celebrate an anniversary. The gift, not a jewel, not a rare painting, not a fancy carriage, but a child. A 12-year-old girl, innocent, vulnerable, and shockingly, she was his own daughter. It's the kind of story that freezes the mind, that makes you question how far cruelty can stretch when wrapped in the veil of tradition or wealth. At first it sounds like an impossible tale, a dark legend whispered through history. But what if there's truth behind it? What if beneath the layers of time, this story reflects a reality that existed, where human lives could be bought, sold, and given as tokens of celebration? Today we're going to unravel this story, piece by piece. You'll learn not just the shocking facts, but the historical context that made such actions possible. We'll explore the world of the elite, where social status and power could blur moral boundaries. We'll look at how children were treated, how family bonds could be shattered, and how society's rules sometimes turned human beings into property. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this story still resonates, why it shocks us, and why it's far more than just a tale from the past. It's a mirror reflecting the extremes of human behavior. As we dig deeper, you'll discover insights you probably haven't heard before. Did you know that in certain eras, gifting a slave wasn't just common, it was considered a sign of wealth and influence? Children were often caught in this system, separated from their families, forced into lives they didn't choose. These aren't just abstract facts, they are glimpses into the human cost of power and privilege. And in this particular story, the stakes are even higher because the child at the center is not just any child. She is the baron's own flesh and blood, hidden in plain sight, a secret that changes everything. What happened next challenges our understanding of morality and family. How did a society allow such things? How could a father see his own daughter as property? And most importantly, what lessons can we take from a story that is as horrifying as it is instructive? This is not just history, it's a cautionary tale, a reflection of what happens when greed, status, and power go unchecked. So stay with me, because in the next few minutes, we will uncover the full story, explore the shocking realities behind it, and examine the hidden truths about wealth, family, and the lengths humans will go to assert dominance. By the end of this video, you will not only know the story, you'll feel the weight of its lessons, and you'll see why understanding these moments from history is crucial, not just to know the past, but to recognize the human values that must guide us today. This story will challenge you, it will shock you, but most importantly, it will make you think. It will make you question, reflect, and awaken a deeper understanding of human nature. So let's begin, and uncover a tale that seems impossible, yet speaks volumes about the world we thought we knew. Before we talk about the shocking act itself, we need to understand the world the baron lived in. In his society, wealth was not just a measure of comfort, it was a symbol of absolute power. Gifts were not given merely to express affection, they were displays of influence, status, and control. The bigger, rarer, or more unusual the gift, the more it reflected on the giver. But even in a world obsessed with opulence and display, what this baron did crosses a line that is hard to even imagine today. He wanted to surprise his wife on their anniversary. A gift, a token of celebration, something that would mark the occasion in a memorable way. But the way he chose to do it speaks volumes about how human life was valued, or rather devalued, when measured against wealth and status. He bought a 12-year-old girl, a human being reduced to property, and presented her as a gift. The very act of giving a person as a present is a jarring concept for modern eyes. It forces us to confront the reality that in certain historical contexts, people could be treated as commodities, stripped of agency and identity. And then comes the twist, the detail that transforms the story from shocking to utterly disturbing. This young girl was not just any child. She was his daughter, the daughter he had fathered, yet chose, or perhaps felt justified, to give away as if she were nothing more than an object in his collection of wealth. It's the kind of revelation that forces us to pause and consider the contradictions within human morality, especially when it is clouded by power and privilege. How could a parent make such a choice? How could societal norms, wealth, and the desire to impress override the most basic instincts of care and protection for one's own child. The moment of revelation, the point at which it becomes known who this girl truly is, casts a long shadow over the entire act. It raises questions about identity, ethics, and the limits of human behavior. It asks us to reflect not only on what happened in this particular case, but also on how history allowed such acts to exist. Was the Baron blind to his own morality, or was this simply a reflection of a culture where the law and society placed property above family, and wealth above conscience? Every layer of the story challenges assumptions about what is acceptable and what is unimaginable, blurring the lines between legend and reality. Even the language we use to describe this moment struggles to capture its gravity. Gift, anniversary, celebration. These words normally carry warmth and joy. In this context, they are twisted, almost grotesque, because they are applied to a situation where innocence and trust have been violated. The story forces us to confront not just the act itself, but the emotional and psychological weight of the choices involved. The young girl's perspective, her fear, her confusion, and the betrayal she experiences are almost unimaginable, yet they are central to understanding the depth of the moment. As we think about this story, it also sparks broader questions about history and human behavior. How many such acts went unnoticed, undocumented, or even normalized because they fit within the accepted structures of wealth and power? How did people rationalize actions that seem, from our modern perspective, cruel beyond measure? This single act, a gift given, a child revealed, a family distorted, becomes a lens through which we can examine the darker corners of human society, the ways in which power can warp morality, and the chilling consequences when innocence is sacrificed for appearances. Before we talk about the specific story of the Baron and his daughter, it's important to understand the broader context of slavery in history. In many societies, enslaved people were not seen as human beings with rights, feelings, or families. They were treated as property, objects that could be bought, sold, inherited, or exchanged, just like land, livestock, or jewelry. This mindset was reinforced by laws, social norms, and economic systems that placed wealth and power above morality. To truly grasp how a parent could give a child as a gift, we need to step into this world and see how normalized such practices were. In some slave societies, the act of buying a person was considered a transaction, not a moral decision. Slaves were often listed in inventories alongside other valuables, their lives reduced to numbers and prices. They could be willed to heirs, used to secure debts, or gifted to friends and relatives to demonstrate status. Ownership was everything, and human value was measured by usefulness, obedience, or economic potential rather than innate worth. This commodification of people made horrifying acts, like gifting a child, possible within the framework of societal norms. It was not uncommon for slave owners to give slaves to their own children. In some cases, these children were very young, and the slaves became a part of the household, serving as attendants, companions, or personal laborers. Parents saw this as passing on wealth and status. A slave in the family was considered a form of inheritance, a tangible asset that would contribute to the child's future power and social position. From this perspective, a gift of a slave was not a cruel gesture in the eyes of society. It was an investment, a demonstration of family fortune, and a signal to the community of one's influence and prosperity. This practice was especially common in the Americas before the abolition of slavery. Plantations, large estates, and wealthy households relied on enslaved labor for economic success, and the wealth of a family was often measured in the number of people they controlled. Children growing up in these environments would learn early that human beings could be treated as property, that ownership conferred authority, and that giving a slave as a gift was a sign of respect and trust. These lessons were embedded in the culture, making acts that seem unimaginable today almost routine for those living within these systems. Beyond the economic rationale, gifting slaves also served a social function. It reinforced hierarchies, strengthened family alliances, and demonstrated generosity or influence in ways that were visible and recognized by peers. A child receiving a slave as a gift was not only inheriting labor, but also inheriting status, privilege, and a sense of entitlement. These customs were codified through law and tradition, creating an environment in which the objectification of human life became part of daily reality. Understanding this historical framework helps explain how stories like that of the Baron could even occur. The concept of gifting a person, while abhorrent to modern sensibilities, was supported by centuries of economic, legal and social structures that dehumanized entire groups of people. Slavery was not just about physical labor, it was a system that normalized domination, commodification, and the subjugation of the most vulnerable. Within this context, the shocking acts of the past become more comprehensible, though no less horrifying, revealing the extremes to which human society can go when power and wealth are placed above humanity. Before we talk about the devastating personal impact of slavery, we need to pause and consider the unimaginable reality of being owned by your own parent. For most of us, the word parent evokes protection, care and unconditional love. But in a society built on the idea of human beings as property, these bonds could be severed, twisted or erased entirely. Children were often seen not as family members to nurture, but as assets to control, sell, or assign, even by the people who brought them into the world. The emotional and psychological toll of this reality is almost impossible to fathom, yet it was a daily reality for countless families living under systems of slavery. Being owned by a parent meant that the most fundamental human relationship was compromised. Parents had the legal authority to dictate the child's entire existence, from where they lived to what work they performed. Childhood, a time meant for growth, learning and security, was replaced with fear, obedience, and uncertainty. Children could be sold, gifted, or reassigned without any consideration for their feelings, health, or safety. The very people who should have been protectors instead became enforcers of control, creating a trauma that would echo through generations. Slavery blurred the line between family and property in ways that are difficult to comprehend today. A parent could own a child, yet also be responsible for feeding, clothing, or educating them. These dual roles created a paradox, where affection, if it existed at all, had to coexist with domination. Many children suffered because they were trapped in this paradox, expected to love and obey, while being treated as commodities. Every interaction carried weight, every decision about their lives was dictated by the parent's judgment and convenience. Childhood innocence was stripped away, replaced by a constant awareness of vulnerability and dependence. The systems of law and society reinforced this cruelty. Slaves were considered property first and people second, and children were no exception. Legal codes often allowed, or even encouraged, parents to sell or give away their children without restriction. The emotional consequences of such laws were staggering. Families were torn apart not by accident or misfortune, but by design, by the very rules that governed society. Children could grow up seeing siblings separated, witnessing parents forced into morally impossible positions, or even enduring their own subjugation at the hands of those who should have protected them. Perhaps most tragically, children often bore the heaviest burdens of slavery. They were vulnerable, defenseless, and powerless. While adults might find ways to resist, negotiate, or survive within the system, children were entirely at its mercy. The abuse, neglect, and exploitation they faced left deep scars, scars that were emotional, psychological, and sometimes physical. Their identities were shaped not by love or nurture, but by ownership, hierarchy, and the whims of those in control. Imagining this reality forces us to confront the darkest aspects of human history. It is one thing to understand slavery as a system, but it is another to truly grasp what it meant for the most innocent and defenseless members of society. Children whose natural role is to be nurtured and protected were often the ones who suffered most acutely under laws and customs designed to dehumanize. It is a chilling reminder that when humanity is subordinated to property and power, even the closest bonds, those between parent and child, can be shattered, leaving pain that resonates far beyond the immediate moment. Before we talk about whether the story of the Baron is fact or fiction, it's important to recognize how history and legend often blur together. Stories like this spread easily, especially when they shock or provoke strong emotions. Many online videos present the Baron's act as a historical fact, describing the purchase of a 12-year-old girl, and the revelation that she was his own daughter. The story circulates widely because it touches on universal themes of betrayal, cruelty, and the corruption of power, drawing viewers in with its drama and moral intensity. It feels real because it fits a pattern we know existed in history: wealthy individuals exercising total control over the lives of the vulnerable, children included. However, when historians examine the record, there is no widely accepted evidence that this particular incident ever happened exactly as the story claims. No primary documents, court records, or contemporary accounts confirm the Baron's actions, or identify the individuals involved. The absence of these sources doesn't necessarily mean something like it couldn't have happened. It only means that as of now, the story cannot be verified. Historians rely on careful documentation, cross-referencing, and primary evidence, and without those, a tale remains in the realm of speculation or legend. This raises a fascinating question about how history is remembered and shared. Some stories persist not because they are entirely factual, but because they capture the essence of a society or a moral truth. The Baron's story, true or not, reflects real abuses that occurred in many parts of the world. Children were separated from families, treated as property, and subjected to unimaginable control. Parents, guardians, or other authority figures sometimes acted in ways that violated basic human decency. The story resonates because it mirrors patterns of oppression, inequality, and cruelty that were documented elsewhere, making it feel authentic even in the absence of hard evidence. It's also important to consider the role of narrative and exaggeration. Legends often amplify certain details to make a point or evoke a stronger reaction. In this case, the idea of a baron gifting his own daughter as a slave heightens the horror and moral tension. Even if the details are partly fictionalized, they force us to confront uncomfortable truths about history and human behavior. The story functions as a cautionary tale, warning about the dangers of power, unrestrained by ethics, the objectification of human life, and the consequences of societies that place wealth and status above compassion and morality. At the same time, stories like this challenge viewers to think critically. In a world flooded with information, it's easy to accept dramatic tales at face value, especially when they are presented convincingly in videos, articles, or social media posts. But the absence of verified evidence reminds us to question sources, to look beyond sensationalism, and to examine the broader historical patterns that might give rise to such narratives. The Baron's story may not be fully documented, but it opens a window into a time and place where power and privilege often went unchecked, and where children and the vulnerable suffered the consequences. Even if the tale is partly or wholly legendary, it has value. It forces reflection, discussion, and awareness. It allows us to explore the psychological, social, and moral dimensions of history in ways that purely factual accounts sometimes cannot. The line between fact and legend becomes secondary to the lesson it imparts, a stark reminder of how human cruelty can manifest, how history can repeat itself, and how stories, whether true or imagined, shape the way we understand the past and our responsibilities in the present. Before we talk about why stories like the Baron's continue to resonate so deeply, we need to consider the raw human emotions they evoke. These stories shock us because they reveal extremes of cruelty that are hard to imagine, even today. They strip away the comforts of modern life and force us to confront a reality in which human beings could be treated as objects, stripped of dignity and autonomy. It's not just the act itself that grabs our attention, it's the layers of moral corruption, the misuse of power, and the way innocence was violated. When a parent could give a child as a gift, or when any human life could be bought and sold, it challenges the very foundations of empathy and morality. Such stories make us pause and question the value of human life. In societies built on slavery, life was often measured not by experiences, emotions, or connections, but by economic worth. Children, parents, and entire communities were assessed as assets or liabilities, not as people with rights and feelings. The human cost was enormous, yet it was hidden behind legal codes, social norms, and economic calculations. Reflecting on this reality forces us to recognize how easily systems can dehumanize people when power and wealth dominate over compassion. It challenges us to see that human value is not something that can be measured in currency, social standing, or convenience. Yet in these historical contexts, it often was. Slavery was never just about labor. It was about power, control, and dominance. It wasn't merely about working the fields, serving in households, or performing assigned tasks. It was about establishing authority over every aspect of a person's life. Owners controlled where people lived, what they ate, when they rested, and even whom they could love. Every decision was made to assert the owner's supremacy. For children, this was even more pronounced. They were utterly dependent on the whims of adults, with no agency to resist or protect themselves. The institution of slavery created a hierarchy, where power was absolute and unchecked, and cruelty was often systemic rather than accidental. These narratives are particularly powerful because they make abstract historical facts tangible. Learning that a person could be owned might feel distant, but imagining a parent exercising that ownership over their own child brings the concept painfully close to home. The tension, the shock, and the moral outrage we feel are evidence of how the story forces us to engage emotionally and intellectually. It's a reminder that slavery was not just a set of economic transactions. It was a societal structure designed to dominate, control, and strip away humanity. Stories like this also provoke self-reflection. They ask us to consider our own values, our understanding of justice, and our empathy for those who were powerless. They highlight the extremes of human behavior, showing us what can happen when moral boundaries are ignored in favor of wealth and control. At the same time, they remind us why protecting human dignity matters today. Even centuries later, these tales resonate because they touch on universal truths about power, exploitation, and the inherent worth of every individual. By examining them, we confront not only the cruelty of the past, but also the responsibilities we have in the present to ensure that such abuses are never repeated. Before we talk about the experiences of children in slave systems, we have to confront a reality that is almost unimaginable today. Imagine being just 10 or 12 years old, barely old enough to understand the world, and being torn from your family, parents, siblings, and familiar surroundings. Everything you know can be taken away without warning, leaving you alone in a life dictated entirely by others. In many slave societies, this was not an occasional tragedy. It was an everyday practice, a system built to separate children from the protection and comfort of their families. Children were often assigned to households where they became part of the labor force. Their duties were not light or symbolic. They were real, demanding, and often harsh. Young girls could be sent to work in kitchens, tend to chores, or care for infants, while boys might be placed in fields, stables, or workshops. These children were expected to obey without question, to learn quickly, and to endure conditions that would challenge even adults. The household or plantation became both school and prison, shaping their lives around service rather than freedom. Some children were not just laborers, they were given to others as gifts. In certain societies, gifting a child to someone else, even a family member, was considered acceptable or even prestigious. It might be framed as a sign of trust, loyalty, or wealth, but the reality for the child was one of displacement and vulnerability. A child could be moved from one household to another, treated as an asset, and stripped of the stability and care that are essential to growing up. This practice turned relationships into transactions and reinforced the idea that children could be owned, traded, and used to demonstrate social power. In some cases, children were specifically assigned to young daughters as personal slaves. This meant that the girl, herself often just a child, was given authority over another child. The younger child's life would revolve around serving, assisting, and obeying someone barely older than herself. While it might appear as a lesson in responsibility or household management, it was fundamentally about reinforcing hierarchy and power from a young age. The psychological impact of this arrangement could be profound. Growing up under such circumstances blurred the lines between care, coercion, and dominance, leaving both the giver and receiver shaped by a system that normalized inequality and control. These practices were widespread enough to be considered routine in many slave societies, particularly in the Americas before the abolition of slavery. Children were viewed less as individuals, and more as extensions of the household or family property. Laws and customs reinforced the idea that ownership included every aspect of a child's life, from labor to living arrangements, from obedience to personal identity. Families could be dismantled, and childhood itself could be stolen, all in the name of social and economic order. Understanding this context is crucial because it shows how pervasive and systematic the dehumanization of children was. It wasn't limited to isolated incidents, it was embedded into the very structure of society. The experiences of these children remind us that slavery was not just a labor system, it was a framework designed to control, manipulate, and exploit human life from its earliest stages. It is a chilling reflection of what happens when power goes unchecked and when innocence is treated as property, rather than as a human right. Whether the story is fully true or partly legend, it symbolizes a brutal reality that cannot be ignored. It reminds us that slavery was never just about labor, it was about control, power, and the way human relationships could be twisted and destroyed by systems that valued wealth over life. Stories like this force us to confront the darkest parts of history and reflect on the importance of protecting human dignity in every generation. If this story moved you, made you think, or opened your eyes to truths from the past, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge, inspire, and reveal the lessons history has to teach us.